The medical scans shouldn't have been possible. Jack stared at the holographic display, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm of pure, unadulterated confusion. The creature on the bio-bed, the human Caleb Vance, was covered in lacerations that would have sent a acrylic warrior into immediate shock. Yet Vance was sitting up, eating a nutrient bar, and asking the terrified medic if he could go back to the gym. It was the first time Jax truly understood the terrifying biology of a Death Worlder. They don't survive damage. They metabolize it. 48 hours earlier, the Zenith Orbital Bastion had felt like a cathedral of war. Jax had arrived feeling small, surrounded by the galaxy's apex predators. There were the obsidian-skinned Malax, walking tanks with natural armor plating, Onus and the serpentine Sylvians, who could crush steel coils with a flex of their tails. And then there was Caleb. Standing in the intake formation, the human looked like a genetic mistake. He was small, barely reaching Jax's shoulder. No exoskeleton, no claws, just soft, pale brown skin that looked like it would tear if you looked at it too hard. He looked fragile. High Overseer Krog, a towering slab of muscle and scarred chitin, had stopped in front of Vance, sneering down at the little mammal. Sol 3, Krog rumbled, the translator implant broadcasting his amusement to the entire company. Gravity rating 9.8. Atmospheric pressure heavy enough to liquefy a standard lung. Tell me, human, did your people evolve from scavengers? You look like prey. A ripple of laughter moved through the ranks. It was cruel, but Jax had silently agreed. And the universe was built on simple rules. Armor meant survival, and mass meant power. Caleb Vance had neither. He was an anomaly, a soft thing from a high-gravity hellscape that the rest of the galaxy avoided. But the mockery didn't last long. The baseline assessment began the next morning. The facility was a sprawling cavern of chrome and pain, calibrated to break the weak. The administrators, perhaps as a joke or perhaps out of incompetence, had failed to adjust the gravity dampeners for the human. Jax watched from the observation deck as Vance stepped onto the endurance track. The gravity in that zone was calibrated for heavy worlders, crushing, oppressive, a weight that made Jax's own knees buckle just standing near the perimeter. Vance didn't buckle. He didn't even stumble. Calibration error? Someone whispered. It wasn't, and the human began to run. Not a sprint, but a steady, rhythmic lope that ate up the distance with terrifying efficiency. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. His heart rate, displayed on the overhead monitors, barely climbed out of the resting zone. He wasn't fighting the gravity. He was wearing it like a tailored suit. We thought the gravity would crush him, but he treated the crushing weight like a warm blanket. The silence on the observation deck grew heavy as Vance moved to the magnetic resistance bench. The machine was designed to test biosphere density, the sheer structural integrity of a species. Vance laid back. The magnetic locks engaged, simulating a weight that usually required hydraulic assistance to move. 1 rep, 2, 10. The machine whined, its servos protesting the load. Vance's face turned a shade of red, a vein pulsing in his neck, but the weight kept moving. Up, down, up, down. It was a display of apex persistence that defied biological logic. How could something so small generate that much kinetic force? Then came the live combat drills. This was where the softness of the human was supposed to be his undoing. He was paired against a reptilian cadet with serrated claws. The fight was brutal. The reptile landed a slash across Vance's chest, opening 3 distinct lines of red. Jax flinched. That was it. End of fight. But Vance didn't stop. He didn't drop. He glanced at the blood, his eyes darkening, and then he stepped into the next strike. He took the hit to deliver one of his own, a short, compact punch that buried itself in the reptile's solar plexus. The sound was wet and dull. The reptile folded instantly. Vance stood over his opponent, chest heaving, blood dripping onto the mats. He looked up at the overseer, his voice calm, terrifyingly steady. Next. It was becoming clear that humanity's primary weapon wasn't their strength, or even their speed. It was their refusal to acknowledge the physics of their own destruction. Evolution didn't give them claws. It gave them the audacity to ignore physics. The sound of calcium under pressure is distinct. It is a dry, fibrous creak, like old wood bending in a gale. Jax heard it through the audio feed of the grav chamber, and his antennae flattened against his skull in sympathetic distress. Inside the chamber, the air shimmered with the heat of the graviton generators. The display read 1.8 Galactic Standard. Caleb was moving through the obstacle course, but his movement had lost its fluidity. It was jagged now, desperate. Every step was a negotiation with physics. He wasn't running, he was falling forward and catching himself over and over again. His skin was flushed a violent, alarming crimson, capillaries bursting under the strain. Yet he finished the rotation. He slapped the end plate, his chest heaving like a bellows, and the gravity disengaged. Jax let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Enough, he thought. He has proven the point. But the Academy didn't want a point proved. They wanted a show. The schedule was accelerated. They didn't give the human time to heal the microfractures in his shins or the bruising on his ribs. They wanted to see what happened when you threw a damaged death worlder at a wall of living stone. The wall was Malak, the obsidian champion. The arena was deafening, a cacophony of shrieks, roars, and stomps from 3,000 cadets. Malak stood in the center, 8 feet of volcanic plate and arrogance. He looked at Caleb, who walked in with his left side heavily taped and a limp, and laughed. The sound was like grinding tectonic plates. "They send me a broken toy," Malak boomed. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't posture. He simply slid into a low stance, his hands up, loose and open. He looked absurdly small. The fight began with the inevitability of a landslide. Malak charged, a blur of black stone. His first strike, a sweeping backhand, connected with Caleb's guard. Even blocked, the force skidded the human across the mat. Caleb rolled, recovered, and was immediately clipped by a follow-up kick that sounded like a hammer hitting wet clay. Jax winced. This was attrition warfare, and the human was losing. But then the rhythm changed. Malak, confident in his victory, overcommitted to a downward smash. He expected the human to dodge or crumble. Caleb did neither. He stepped in. It was a suicidal move. He stepped inside the reach of the obsidian arms, pressing his soft body against the rock-hard carapace. He ignored the impact, ignored the pain that must have been blinding, and wrapped his legs around Malak's waist. It was physics again. Leverage. Caleb isolated Malak's left arm. The limb was thick, armored, strong enough to punch through a bulkhead. But joints are universal. Joints have limits. Caleb leveraged his hips, trapped the arm against his own chest, and pulled. He wasn't fighting the armor. He was fighting the geometry. There was a sickening pop. Malak roared. sound of confusion and sudden, a white-hot agony. The giant stumbled, his balance compromised by the agonizing pressure on his elbow. Caleb didn't let go. He tightened the choke, cutting off the blood flow to the brain, his face a mask of grim, bloody determination. The obsidian champion, the unmovable object, flailed for 3 seconds. Then he tapped the mat. The silence that followed was absolute. Medical teams swarmed the ring, but Jax didn't watch them. He watched the cadets. The laughter was gone. The jeering was dead. In its place was a heavy, suffocating respect. They were looking at Caleb Vance not as a biological curiosity, but as a predator. Later, in the medical bay, Malik sat with his arm in a regeneration sling, staring at the floor. He did not stop. The giant murmured, his voice hollow. I broke his ribs. I felt them give, and he did not stop. It was the lesson the galaxy had needed to learn, delivered in blood. Months later, the curriculum changed. The Academy introduced kinetic dampening and leverage, a polite name for the human art of grappling. The mockery ceased. When a human entered a room now, conversations died down, eyes lowered. Jax graduated with honors, assigned to a quiet patrol route in the Outer Rim. He was relieved. He wanted distance. Because as he packed his kit, he couldn't stop thinking about the recruiter's report he'd glanced at on the command deck. Caleb Vance was considered standard infantry. Average. Earth had billions of them. Jax looked out the viewport at the stars, cold and distant. The galaxy had spent eons searching for the ultimate weapon. Something unbreakable. Something that could endure the unendurable. And they had finally found it on a wet blue rock in Sector 9. They had recruited the monsters. And God help anyone who gave them a reason to be angry.